Hello to all the associates and the Sisters of the Living Word. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today about the important issue of immigration. As you know, people have been migrating since the beginning of time. Many of the reasons are the same. They migrate to escape persecution for political, religious, or cultural beliefs. They migrate because of changes in the environment due to a lack of water, deforestation, mining, logging, lack of arable land. They migrate because of structures that oppress whole groups of people because of their race, their caste, their tribal affiliations, or their indigenous heritage. And the list goes on. However, rather than addressing global migration and offering policies or statistics, myths or causes, I want to focus my remarks on a specific group of immigrants, unaccompanied immigrant minors who come to the United States in search of protection, in search of asylum. I'm not speaking about children who have been separated from their parents at the border, a horrific situation that has played out in the United States in recent years as a misguided deterrent to migration. Rather, I'm going to be speaking about minors who have fled their homes on their own, not only because they wanted to, but because they felt that they had no other choice. For what person in her or his right mind would leave everything behind, family, friends, support, to travel to an unknown country with a different culture, a different language, only to be criminalized and detained, oftentimes in unsanitary and unsafe conditions? Who are these young people who leave everything behind? Why do they come to the United States? How do they get here? And then what happens to them once they get here? In January of 2017, Father Corey Brost, a fellow Viatorian, and I founded Viator House of Hospitality with the blessing and the financial backing of our religious congregation. Viator House is an alternative to adult detention for unaccompanied minors who have aged out of youth detention and have nowhere to go except adult detention on their 18th birthday in handcuffs. These detention centers are housed in county jails and for-profit detention centers. They make money off the misery of immigrants. Before I start speaking about these young men, I want to distinguish between a refugee and asylee, because oftentimes these terms are confused. In short, a refugee is a person who arrives in the United States, is welcomed, and is resettled by a sponsoring organization after having been vetted by government agencies. They arrive after having lived in a refugee camp outside their own country. Upon arrival, they receive financial assistance, a furnished apartment, furniture, clothing, job training, medical assistance, case management services, and money for rent for a period of time. Catholic Charities, Refugee One, Exodus, World Relief are just a few of these resettlement agencies. On the other hand, an asylee, a person seeking asylum, a person seeking protection in the United States, appears at the US border and requests asylum. Upon establishing a credible fear of returning to their home country, they are placed in detention while their case winds its way through the asylum process in the United States, a process that could take several years. What is important to note, what is important to emphasize here, is that enshrined in United States federal law is the right for a person to come to the United States to request protection, to request asylum. It is not illegal to do so. To turn asylum seekers away at our southern border, which this current administration is currently doing, and have them remain in Mexico is simply inhumane. So who are these young people who have come to Viator House? When I asked one young man from Somalia why he risked everything to come here, he said, "When you have nothing, when your life is threatened, one day you get up and you make the decision, I have to leave, and you just start walking. Since January of 2017, Viator House has welcomed 63 youth from 4 faith traditions in 18 countries. They're Muslim, Christian, Sikh, and Hindu. Many of them have shared with me that it is their faith that has kept them going. Today, as I record this, today celebrates Eid, the end of Ramadan. For the past 30 days, many of the young men in Viator House have fasted and have prayed together. It is this faith that keeps them going despite an unknown future. Where have the guys from Viator House come from? As I said, 18 countries. They have come from Bangladesh, from China, from El Salvador, from Eritrea, from Gambia, from Ghana, from Guatemala, from Guinea, from Honduras, from India, from Mali, from Mexico, from Niger, from Nigeria, from Pakistan, from Somalia, from Sri Lanka, and from Vietnam. The majority of them, if not all of them, have experienced trauma. And we speak of the 3 types of trauma they have experienced. Trauma in home country, which caused them to flee in the first place. Trauma along their journey. Many of them have been robbed. Many of them see death. And trauma being detained once they arrive in this country, having all of their choices taken away from them. As educators, many of you have spent years working with children, so you can imagine the psychological effects of this trauma on young people. Many experience variations of post-traumatic stress, such as depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, self-harm. Many have nightmares. Many can't sleep. Some will self-isolate and withdraw at times, especially in the beginning when they get to our house. And others feel guilty because they made it here while their family members continue to suffer at home. One person told me, Brother Michael, I can't eat if I know that my family is not eating back home. Why do they come? Each of the 63 young men has his own unique story as to why he fled. I wish you could hear their stories in their own words. But their lawyers don't want them to share their stories out of a concern that it could harm their asylum case once they go to court. And others are fearful of sharing their stories for fear that somehow the story will get back to home country and their family members' lives will be put at risk. But they come because of persecution by government actors, because of their sexual orientation, because of threats of gangs, because of extremist groups, because of lawlessness in home country, because of death threats. What I would like to share with you now are some of the reasons, the personal reasons, of 4 of the young men who have come to Viator House. Their names have been changed so as to protect their identity. In West Africa, Ahmed came home from school to find his mother being raped by members of the military in retaliation for his father's political action. When Ahmed intervened, armed soldiers broke his leg and threatened the family that if the father did not stop his political work, they would be back. In Central America, Enrique and his friend refused to join a gang while they were walking home from school. The next day, Enrique's friend was murdered, found in the street. Enrique went to the gang and apologized for not joining and begged them to let him join the gang, fearful that if he didn't, his life would be taken from him. He was told that he needed to prove his loyalty. He was told, go home, choose one parent, kill that parent, and bring us proof that that parent is dead, and we will allow you to join the gang, and you will be safe. Al from Asia told me that in his village, quote, they kill people like me. Bao is gay. Jorge from Central America was working in the streets trying to scavenge as much as he could to sell, and he was approached by a wealthy man who later raped him. When he reported the rape in court, his family was threatened by the perpetrator. Jorge's grandmother told him that the best thing for him to do was to leave the country. He did at age 16. Thus, the nightmares, the sleepless nights, the cutting to make them feel that they are alive, since so much has become numb to them around them. How do you block out the violence? How do you block out the memories? How do you block out the pain? Many of our participants want to remain invisible so that they won't be targeted. They don't want people to know that they are immigrants. They listen to the news. They know that their home countries have been labeled as shithole countries by President Trump. They know that this administration does not want them. They see the hate and the demonstrations against immigrants. At Viator House, no staff person is allowed to say to a participant if he questions an expectation, if he doesn't do his house job, well, if you don't like it here, you can always leave. How unfair is that? Trauma-informed care is critical in accompanying youth at Viator House. For us, it is important for youth to tell their stories in their own words and in their own actions and in their own times. It is what helps them heal. And yet, despite what they have been through, if you were to meet them, if you were to come to our home, you would never suspect that trauma that they have endured and continue to deal with is a part of their everyday life. Many go to school, several have graduated high school, 3 are in college, many go to work. They all do their house jobs, or at least are supposed to. They prepare their own meals, they clean their rooms, they do their laundry. But it's not perfect, right? Rather, it is always a journey of setbacks and successes. How do these kids from Asia, how do these kids from Africa, how do these kids from Central America get here? For youth coming from Asia and Africa, one way or another, they get airfare to South America, usually the country of Brazil, and then they start walking, hopping on buses, hitching rides. From Brazil, they go to Peru. From Peru, they go to Ecuador. From Ecuador, they go to Colombia, and they set out in a boat, oftentimes without life preservers, into the sea to the Darien Gap, which is the jungle that connects Colombia to Panama. One youth carried the body of his mother who had died along the journey for 2 days during the jungle until he could no longer carry her. And eventually he was convinced to bury her in a shallow grave and to keep going. Once they survive the jungle, walking 8 to 10 days, they get into Panama. From Panama, they go to Costa Rica. Costa Rica, they go to Nicaragua. Nicaragua, they get to Honduras. Honduras to Guatemala. Guatemala to Mexico, and then up to the US border, where once they cross, they are detained. The young men from Central America, they go from country to country through up to Mexico and then to the border. And what happens once they get here? After turning oneself in for inspection at the border and passing a credible fear interview, a minor is taken into the custody of the US Border Patrol. Within 72 hours, the youth is turned over to the United States Department of Health and Human Services. And within this department is an Office of Refugee Resettlement. And eventually, the youth is taken into the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, even though they're not considered refugees. ORR then contracts with social service agencies where minors are placed. Case managers within these agencies work to place the youth with family members or friends, if at all possible. If it's not possible, some are placed in foster care in the United States. If a home or foster care cannot be found for them, then once they turn 18, as I said, they are transferred to adult detention in handcuffs. Viator House is only one of a handful of programs of post-18 options for these youth. Soon after Viator House opened, we were able to provide technical assistance and guidance to a group of women religious in the Chicago area who then opened up Bethany House of Hospitality in October of 2017. It is modeled on Viator House and works with young women who have been released from detention with nowhere to go. At the height of unaccompanied children arriving in the US 4 or 5 years ago, a delegation from a local organization traveled to Honduras to meet with the parents of the children who left that village in Honduras and traveled to the United States. When asked, how could you let your 15-year-old daughter leave home with her friends, knowing the dangers that might befall her on her way to the United States? A young mother said, I would rather my daughter be killed on her way to the United States than shot dead in front of my home, with me not being able to do anything to protect her. These are the choices parents are forced to make. Today, when these youth arrive at the US border, they are now turned away and told to wait in Mexico until their number is called for an interview. Prior to COVID, the weeks leading up to COVID, only a handful of interviews were granted. And now, no interviews are granted, and no one is allowed into this country. I wish I had more time to discuss how today's pandemic is adversely affecting immigrants, newly arrived, and those who have been here in our country for a while. An entire presentation can be offered on how immigrants are treated as people easily replaceable at jobs in factories, in meat processing plants, in grocery stores, in landscaping, as Uber and Lyft drivers, to name just a few industries. Many, despite having individual taxpayer identification numbers, which they use to pay taxes to the government, are ineligible for the $1,200 stimulus checks and other coronavirus relief payments. What might you do as a community of women and associates, women religious and associates? In a moment, you're going to see a slide with various websites that you can access that will share various campaigns that wonderful organizations are undertaking to advocate for the safety and the welfare of immigrants, both newly arrived and those here. Before I leave, I want to end with a note of gratitude. For indeed, my life has been blessed by working with many of you. I am grateful to Sisters Mary Catherine Connolly, Joanne Ginter, Bridget Tembo, and Marianne Rust, and former SLW Lisa Palega, who are wonderful partners on our ICDI post-detention teams. I'm grateful to Sisters Jean Creeder and Chris Vornkamp, who are wonderful companions as we visited immigrant women and men detained in McHenry County Jail. I'm grateful again to Sister Mary Catherine, to Joanne Fedewa, Eileen Geimer, Marlene Geimer, Barbara Mass, Carrie Miller, again Chris Vornkamp, and Luann Wilhelm, who are amazing in the resettlement and support of the Safaf family from Syria. And I'm sure there are many others of you who are part of that resettlement. And to the entire SLW community who generously offered financial assistance to the Safaf family during their first year. Again, I'm grateful to Sister Marianne Rust and Lisa Palega, who were wonderful members of Sisters and Brothers of Immigrants, advocating for compassionate and comprehensive immigration reform. I'm grateful to Sister Carrie Miller, who supports Viator House of Hospitality by serving on its board of directors. I'm grateful to the Sisters of Living Word for renting the garden apartment at their Illinois Street residence to my congregation for 2 alums of Viator House. To Sisters Sharon, Joel, Chris, and Carrie, thank you for welcoming them and for making them feel safe. And finally, I'm grateful for the chance encounter with former Sister of the Living Word, Sean Beck, at Catholic Theological Union back in the early 80s, while we were both students. Although I never met Sister Brenda Kelzer, Sean's description of Brenda's ministry opened my eyes and was one of the reasons I became a social worker. So I owe a debt of gratitude to the Sisters of the Living Word, to the Associates of the Living Word, for all you are in this world and all you have been in my life. May your assembly be a period of grace for each and every one of you. Thank you for your very kind attention.